Deborah, PhD from the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. I'm the chair for today. This is our last of 8 special lunchtime seminars. For those of you who are new to us today, well, thanks for coming. We hope you're catching on the last one. Thank you so much for coming. And today we have Ms. Paula Robinson from the ILO, who has so kindly agreed to talk to us about labor and all those, no, not labor, Global Partnership for Development, this MDG8. There's one we don't get right very often. So we're very happy to have this particular presentation. So I'll change over now to Danny, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much. Just to give you some context in terms of this joint initiative and joint collaboration between the Institute of Gender and Development Studies and the UN system through the Gender Theme Group here in Trinidad and Tobago. Sorry, good afternoon. Happy to have you. Great. So the rationale really for having this lecture series on gender and the MDGs was really to ask ourselves 3 things. Number 1, where has Trinidad and Tobago reached? What progress have we made in the achievement of the MDGs? Secondly, how does gender and the link between the goals that we set ourselves for 2015 and issues related to gender factor into that progress or lack of progress that we made in Trinidad and Tobago? And finally, we also wanted it to be a platform for sharing best practices and strategies amongst varying stakeholders, because we have here through the 7 other lectures that we've had, and a few of you have been to almost all of them. We've had academics, we've had civil society partners, we've had technical persons from the various ministries, of course the UN system of other international development partners from the European Union and other even diplomatic partners. So we have come together to really ascertain where we are, what is happening, where do we need to go in Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to attaining the MDGs and ensuring that gender-related issues are mainstreamed through all of these programming and other initiatives that we're using to reach those targets. So I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Paula Robinson, and on behalf of both the IGDS and the UN system, we have to thank Paula tremendously because, as Deborah mentioned, unfortunately, our schedules at the UN here are sometimes so chaotic, and that's the best word that we can use, that you can be in country at the beginning of the week. By the middle of the week, you're told that you have to leave the country, and we have had really to reschedule this lecture at least, I think, twice or even 3 times, based on all of the schedules. But it's a fitting moment as we've just come through 2 processes. First, the consultation on the National Strategic Plan for HIV. Then, on Wednesday, the consultation on the National Gender and Development Policy, to see how gender issues inform all of these processes that are happening in Trinidad and Tobago. And it's quite fitting that we end this series with the International Labour Organization, because a lot of the issues coming out of those very policies and plans impact and are impacted by the workplace. And ILO, of course, within the system is the lead on that. So we're so happy to have Paula here. I think she returned from St. Lucia's yesterday.
It was Norway, actually.
Oh, Norway. Okay.
that was the time before.
Yes.
When we didn't have it.
Okay, so Paula is a Jamaican national, and a graduate of the University of the West Indies, and joined the International Labour Organization, ILO, office for the Caribbean as Senior Specialist on Workers' Activities in June 2003. Paula is responsible for providing information, advice, and training to workers' organizations in 13 English and Dutch-speaking CARICOM states, as well as 9 territories of the Caribbean that are also covered by ILO. Her assignment also includes her duties as gender focal point. Paula started her professional career with the government of Jamaica, first as a language teacher at Mulgrove High School in Kingston, and then as a protocol officer at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, after which she did a short stint in the Ministry of Local Government before leaving Jamaica. Paula started her international trade union career in 1984 when she worked for WCOTP, which was the founding member of Education International. In this global teachers union, she served as the coordinator of development programs and was responsible for workers' education activities in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and of course, here in the Caribbean. These programs and activities aimed to strengthen union capacity and including the empowerment of women as activists and leaders. She left the international labor movement for a time to work with refugees and asylum seekers in the municipality of Trondheim in Norway, where she became fluent in Norwegian, a skill that many of us perhaps would have never known because none of us speak Norwegian. In 1997, she returned to the labor movement as education secretary for the International Federation of Building and Woodworkers, and during her tenure at IFBWW, which is now known as the Building and Workers International, Paula worked mainly with trade unions in Africa and Latin America to develop workers' education programs to build trade union capacities. However, Paula's work as focal point for gender and child labor issues brought her into contact with building workers' unions, not only in Africa and Latin America, but also Asia and the Pacific. Now, after this wealth of course, academic as well as professional experience that Paula has here, so we're very happy to have her make the presentation today. And we look forward not only to what she is going to share, but to what you will also share after the presentation. Paula?
You were talking about somebody else. Before I start, this lecture has been fraught with mishap in terms of its implementation. And when I heard Tammy's introduction as to why the lecture, I began to wonder, well, okay, maybe I went off on another track. But we have a lecture. We have 12 pages of a lecture. I hope not to put you to sleep. And I hope that what I say will in fact generate some discussion. Millennium Development Goal number 8 states, develop a global partnership for development. It recognizes, therefore, that for as long as we continue to live in a globalized economy, sustainable development can only be achieved through partnership at the global, international, national, and local levels. The International Labour Organization, from its beginnings in 1919, affirmed this basic principle when it stated in its constitution that the failure of any nation to adopt humane conditions of labor is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries. This ILO tenet promotes cooperation and solidarity between nations for the establishment of a level playing field on which the blocks of development can be installed and built. MDG8 has 6 targets with 16 indicators of achievement. The targets read: 1. develop further an open, rule-based, predictable, non-discriminatory trading and financial system. 2, address the special needs of least developed countries, landlocked countries, and small island developing states. 3, deal comprehensively with developing countries' debts. 4, in cooperation with pharmaceutical companies, provide access to affordable essential drugs in developing countries. 5, in cooperation with the private sector, make available benefits of new technologies, especially ICT. Well, the MDG covers matters of trade and financing, affordable drugs, telecommunications, debt sustainability, the special needs of the least developed countries, as well as landlocked developing countries and small island developing states. It is probably the most complex of the MDGs, certainly long-term in scope, because it recognizes that development can only be achieved through cooperation at the global level in the globalized world that we now live in. The first target, develop further an open, rule-based, predictable, non-discriminatory trading and financial system, together with indicator 12, includes a commitment to good governance, development, and poverty reduction, both nationally and internationally. Together provide me with the entry point for my presentation today. The presentation will look particularly at how the ILO and its work together with its constituents and other agencies can and do contribute to good governance, advancing the development agenda and poverty reduction, both at the local, national, and international levels. The International Labour Organization is the only United Nations agency with a tripartite structure where representatives of employers and workers participate on an equal footing with those of governments. These representatives of governments and the social partners meet once a year to work together to advance the organization's mandate of social justice through the formulation of international policies and programs to promote basic human rights, improve working and living conditions, and enhance employment opportunities, all of which have become codified as the Decent Work Agenda. What is the Decent Work Agenda? The Decent Work Agenda is a balanced and integrated programmatic approach to pursuing the objectives of full and productive employment and decent work for all at the global, regional, national, sectoral, and local levels. The agenda comprises 4 pillars, namely employment creation and enterprise development, social protection for all, standards and rights at work, governance and social dialogue. Decent work is a clearly defined, universal and indivisible goal based on fundamental values and principles. In operational terms, decent work is an evolving target, changing to reflect varied national and local situations, and taking due consideration of different levels of development and national capacity. But its integrated and balanced nature cannot be compromised. The Decent Work Agenda combines policies under its 4 pillars to maximize the synergies among those pillars as they apply to different policy levels and concrete situations. All dimensions need to be considered. There is no question of picking and choosing some components at the detriment of others. Employment creation and enterprise development. The first pillar of decent work is employment creation and enterprise development. This pillar is framed in the vision of decent work for all workers. It is also accepted that the principal route out of poverty is through sustainable, productive work. poverty elimination is impossible unless the economy generates opportunities for investment, entrepreneurship, job creation, and sustainable livelihoods. Some of the areas in which the ILO works to contribute to job creation are skills development for sustainable livelihoods, investing in jobs and the community, promoting entrepreneurship, building local development through cooperatives. Skills development is well known. It is well known that skills are essential to improve productivity, incomes, and access to employment opportunities. Yet a striking feature of most poverty reduction strategies is the absence of vocational education and training, even though the vast majority of working people living in poverty cannot afford and have no access to training opportunities. The ILO is working with its constituents and others to rethink human resource development policies in partnership with the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. The ILO is making the connection between education and the acquisition of skills for a productive working life. At the same time, it is developing new strategies focused on the specific needs of working people living in poverty. In this cause, public-private partnerships are key to understanding the changing patterns of skills demands. I would just like to insert here that in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, the ILO has been working with Trinidad and Tobago in terms of their national training agency, which is the agency that deals with vocational education and training, and has been working in terms of, because Trinidad, Jamaica, and Barbados were three of the founding members in what is now the Caribbean network of training agencies, where they have come together to ensure that there is synergy and complementarity across the region within the context of the CARICOM integration process, that their courses are matched up and that their resources are shared. Investing in jobs and community. For 25 years, the ILO has pioneered work in the field of employment-intensive infrastructure programs. It is now widely recognized that these programs are effective in bringing much-needed income to poor families and their communities. These efforts have been considered successful because they create between 3 and 5 times as much employment for the same level of investment. In this category, I'm afraid to say that we haven't had a lot of examples where we have had employment-intensive infrastructure programs in Trinidad and Tobago, but there is one that has been developed in Guyana. Promoting entrepreneurship. The tools developed by the ILO to promote micro and small enterprises can be targeted to meet the needs of the poorest. ILO training courses on how to start and improve a small business attract many thousands of poor people with aspirations and good ideas for a business of their own. Many have already developed some kind of income-generating activity out of pure necessity for survival. Here, our tools and guidance turn their ingenuity and commitment into entrepreneurship and sound management. For example, home-based processing activities become small roadside restaurants. Carpenter shops expand their markets with new products. And hairdressers start small beauty salons. In response to new demands from community groups wanting to improve their living conditions, targeted support helps them to set up sustainable waste collection enterprises or drinking water kiosks. These community-based enterprises are a source of new job opportunities for youth, women with low skill levels. In partnership with local governments, they provide sustainable environmental services which are accessible and affordable for the poor. Blended into the training approach are concerns for job quality, productivity, organization, gender equality, and dialogue, especially when small enterprises start engaging more workers. Building local development through cooperatives. Participation and inclusion are central to a new approach to poverty reduction. Cooperatives are an ideal instrument in such a strategy, and the ILO has long drawn on the strength of the movement. Meeting the challenges of globalization requires strong local communities, strong local leadership, and strong local solutions. Cooperatives have proved to be a key organizational form in building new models to combat social exclusion and poverty, for example, through local development initiatives. Cooperative members learn from each other, innovate together, and by increasing control over livelihood, build up the sense of dignity that the experience of poverty often destroys. We have done a lot of work with the cooperative movement and with small business enterprises that have been run by women in Trinidad. A lot of work has been done by my colleagues in this area. The second pillar of decent work, or the decent work agenda, is social protection. Social protection refers to the work in the areas of occupational safety and health and the social security systems which provide a safety net when one is unable to work or no longer employed. These include unemployment benefits, maternity benefits, accident and injury benefits, as well as pension benefits. Poor people are unprotected and usually vulnerable persons in the system. The earning power of those living in poverty is suppressed by marginalization and lack of support systems. The ILO is working to find new ways to provide social protection and reclaim the role of the state in this sphere. Women's capacity to renegotiate the distribution of unpaid work, caring for family needs, is crucial. Support for people unable to work because of age, illness, or disability is essential. With respect to improving and expanding safety and health standards at workplaces in the Caribbean, the ILO provided technical support for the development of the CARICOM model legislation on occupational safety, health, and the working environment. This model legislation was formulated to provide CARICOM states with a platform for moving to more modern legislation. This legal framework places emphasis on safe working environment, which means the prevention of both workplace accidents and disease is paramount. The Occupational Safety and Health Acts of both Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago are fashioned on the CARICOM model, which enshrines the international standards set by the ILO. The third pillar, the promotion of fundamental principles and rights at work. From its inception, the principal role of the International Labour Organization has been to set international labor standards, stipulating the minimum internationally acceptable norms in the world of work. The Decent Work Agenda, recognizing that among these international standards, there are 4 areas which are also considered fundamental principles and rights at work, as well as basic human rights. The first of these principles and rights is linked to freedom of association and collective bargaining. This refers to the 2 fundamental rights. One, that each and every worker and employer have the right to form and join organizations of their own choosing to advance and protect their interests. And two, that workers who organize are to be protected and to have a voice in their workplace through representations, consultations, and negotiations on behalf of the designated bargaining unit. Collective bargaining is the most widespread form of social dialogue and an integral process for building workplace democracy. The second of these fundamental principles and rights at work is that there should be no child labor. As early as 1919, it was evident to the ILO constituents that children should be protected from work, which may be detrimental to their development, because the fifth convention adopted dealt with minimum age for industry. Subsequently, the Minimum Age Convention of 1973, which is a comprehensive convention that covers all branches of economic activity, sets a minimum age for entry into employment. This age is usually the same as the school leaving age. In the Caribbean, all 13, retract, 10, 11, 12, 11 countries have signed on to this convention. There are 2 countries that are still working on that because they will not ratify it until their national legislation has passed. But they have set either 15 or 16, which is around the grade 9 age. And Trinidad and Tobago has set the upper age, which is 16, as the minimum age that it is legal for a young person to be employed. Any child under 16 would be considered in the child labor category if they were full-time employed, or even part-time employed but jeopardizing their education, the ability to be educated, to benefit from education and to develop as we would like them to develop, to become constructive and productive adult workers. Along with the minimum age principle, there's also the Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor, which targets the elimination of hazardous work for children under 18 years of age. The convention stipulates 4 categories of work which would constitute the worst forms of child labor. 3 categories are specified. 1, all forms of slavery or practices similar to slavery, such as the sale and trafficking of children, debt bondage, forced or compulsory labor, including forced or compulsory recruitment of children for use in armed conflict. The use, procuring, or offering of a child for prostitution, for the production of pornography, or for pornographic performances. 3, the use, procuring, or offering of a child for illicit activities, in particular for the production and trafficking of drugs as defined in the relevant international treaties. It also describes a 4th category which has to be specifically determined by the government and the social partners for their national situation. And this refers to work which by its nature or the circumstances in which it is carried out is likely to harm the health, safety, or morals of children. Now, Trinidad has ratified this convention. However, there is still work to be done on generating what are those categories of hazardous work for children under 18. A lot of the countries have ratified in fact, I think all the countries, all 13 CARICOM countries that we cover, English and Dutch-speaking countries, have ratified this convention. However, there's still work to be done in terms of making sure that the regulations are in place. The third area of rights and principles is that work should be freely chosen. So there are 2 international standards dealing with the abolition and suppression of forced or compulsory labor. The first of these seeks to suppress forced labor in the shortest possible time. This is the only standard that requires penal punishment for its violation, as forced labor should be declared illegal in every state signatory to this convention. The second convention, the Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, aims to prohibit the recourse to forced or compulsory labor in any form for certain purposes. Each state which ratifies this convention undertakes to suppress and not to make use of any form of forced labor or compulsory labor as a means of political coercion or education, or as a punishment for holding or expressing political views or views ideologically opposed to the established political, social, or economic system, as a method of mobilizing and using labor for purposes of economic development, as punishment for having participated in strikes, or as a means of racial, social, national, or religious discrimination. All CARICOM countries have ratified this convention. And if you were to ask a person in the street, do we have forced labor in the Caribbean? The person would instinctively say no. However, we have to be clear that forced labor today manifests itself in new forms. For example, a migrant worker enters the country without the necessary work permit, finds a job, and the employer holds on to the worker's travel documents. This means that the worker is unable to exercise her right to choose her employment freely, and this is a violation of her rights and the standards set in these conventions. The fourth area of rights encompasses the principles of equal opportunity and treatment. The Convention number 111 on no discrimination in employment and occupation calls for a national policy to eliminate discrimination in employment, training, and working conditions. Discrimination is defined as any distinction, exclusion, or preference based on race, color, sex, which includes sexual orientation, because it is also under this convention that we deal with stigma and discrimination on the basis of HIV. Religion, political opinion, national extraction, or social origin, or any other ground as may be specified by the state concerned after consultation with the social partners, which has the effect of nullifying or impairing equality of opportunity or treatment in employment or occupation. This convention also seeks to promote equal opportunity and treatment. Opportunity refers to providing an equal chance to access to vocational training, to employment, and to particular occupations, as well as to promotion. Treatment refers to entitlements in pay, working conditions, security of employment, and so on. The principle of equal treatment is specifically addressed in the Equal Remuneration Convention of 1951, number 100, which establishes the standard of equal pay and benefits for men and women for work of equal value. It provides the framework to address the questions of inequality, not only between individual men and women, but between occupations dominated by women and those dominated by men, which are often more highly paid. Economic empowerment has been recognized, therefore, from as far back as the early 1950s as a key instrument in the advancement of women. Discrimination is a basis for social exclusion and poverty. Throughout the world, gender inequality intersects with economic deprivation to produce more intensified forms of poverty on average for women than for men. Promoting gender equality and eliminating all forms of discrimination at work are essential to defeating poverty. Understanding the particular forms of discrimination at the local level is key to poverty elimination. They vary from country to country and culture to culture. However, the principle of equal opportunity and equal treatment does not stop at the two fundamental human rights conventions just mentioned, but extends to three other standards. There are three other standards which address issues of gender as they relate to the world of work. These are the Maternity Protection Convention, Workers with Family Responsibilities Convention, and the recently adopted Domestic Workers Convention. Let us have a look to see what the standards set by these conventions and their recommendations are. Maternity Protection Convention 2000, number 183, essentially provides protection for women workers of childbearing age, their unborn child, as well as secures their jobs during pregnancy and immediately after childbirth. This convention also sets the minimum standard of 14 weeks maternity leave, while recommendation number 191 advocates for the prolongation of maternity leave up to 18 weeks and its extension in the event of multiple births. There are some people in the room who may think that this might sound excessive, but remember, this is only the minimum international standard. We have good practice in Sweden where parents get 6 months leave. There is a portion that has to be served by the mother, but the remainder will be served by the father. And that has been standard practice since in the 80s. So there may be people looking at 14 weeks and 18 weeks minimum with an extension if you have twins or triplets, but that is really just the minimum standard. Recommendation 191 also envisages other types of leave. Leave for the father in case of the death, sickness, or hospitalization of the mother before the expiry of postnatal leave. Parental leave during a period following the expiry of maternity leave, and leave in the case of adoption. Every state which ratifies Convention 183 has to adopt measures to ensure that maternity does not constitute a source of discrimination in employment or in access to employment. It is also prohibited for employers to terminate the employment of a woman during her pregnancy or absence on leave, or during a period following her return to work, except on grounds unrelated to the pregnancy or the birth of the child and its consequences or nursing. Finally, when the woman returns to work, she must be guaranteed the right to return to the same position or an equal position paid at the same rate. So it is not only protection for maternity, it is also protection for the economic independence of the woman and also for the equal participation of fathers in that whole period when the child has just been born and you're supposed to be bonding with the child. Trinidad and Tobago has not ratified the Maternity Leave Protection Convention of 2000. However, we have two good examples related to that convention. In the first instance, one trade union used the standard soon after its adoption in 2000 to negotiate successfully for 14 weeks maternity leave on behalf of its members, which was higher than the minimum allowed for by the legislation. And as recently as I think 2 weeks ago, the government has done the work to increase the national maternity leave minimum to 14 weeks. Workers with family responsibilities. Who are workers with family responsibilities? These are men and women workers with responsibilities in relation to their dependent children or other members of their immediate family who clearly need their care or support, where such responsibilities restrict their possibilities of preparing for, entering, participating in, or advancing in economic activity. The Workers with Family Responsibilities Convention of 1981, number 156, is intended to create effective equality of opportunity and treatment in employment and occupation between men and women workers with family responsibilities and between such workers and other workers. Each state party to the convention must have the objective of enabling persons with family responsibilities to engage in employment without being subject to discrimination, and to the extent possible without conflict between their employment and family responsibilities. For this purpose, all possible measures have to be taken to enable these workers to exercise their right to free choice of employment, to become integrated into the labor force, and to re-enter the labor force after an absence due to these responsibilities. Take account of their needs in terms of terms and conditions of employment, social security, and community planning, and develop or promote community services such as child care and elder care. The convention also establishes that family responsibilities shall not constitute a valid reason for termination of employment. That is a whole area of discussion which will need a culture change. In the Caribbean, I think there are only two countries, Antigua and Barbados and Belize, who have actually ratified this convention. Trinidad has not. In terms of the assessments that have been made, as well as the previous discussions which led up to the first draft of the gender policy, a lot of these aspects were taken into consideration and attempts made to incorporate them in their initial policy. I don't know what will happen to the imminent policy. The final gender equality convention that I'd like to look at is the Domestic Workers Convention of 2011, number 189. Domestic workers make up a significant portion of the labor force worldwide. Domestic workers represent 3.6% of global wage employment. Most of domestic workers are women. Many are under 18 years, as well as many are migrant workers. Their contribution to society and the economy is either not counted or undercounted and undervalued. And they're often excluded from labor and social protection and are vulnerable to discrimination and other human rights abuses. The recently adopted Domestic Workers Convention recognizes that domestic workers have a right to decent work like all other workers. It seeks to formalize the employment relationship in the interest of both worker and employer. It advances the gender equality agenda and complements existing ILO standards. The two overarching obligations of states ratifying this convention are the effective promotion and protection of the human rights of all domestic workers and the implementation of measures to ensure fair terms of employment and decent working and living conditions. The ILO and domestic workers organizations in the Caribbean are working together to campaign for the ratification of this convention by Caribbean states, because this would provide a ready-made common platform of labor protection for these workers and responsibilities of the governments within the context of the CARICOM single market and economy and its policy of free movement of certain categories of workers, which include domestic workers. The obligations under Convention number 189 should not be too difficult to meet, since most jurisdictions in CARICOM have already ratified the 8 fundamental conventions, which we have spoken about earlier. If 189 were to be ratified by Trinidad and Tobago, it would mean that domestic workers would have to be recognized as a worker like all other workers under the law. At the moment, they are specifically excluded as workers. So by law, they have no workers' rights. And what we're talking about is the majority of people who are low-paid, waged workers, who are women and often heads of households. It would also mean that the Occupational Safety and Health Act would need to recognize residences as workplaces, so that the domestic worker would have equal treatment as that of any other worker in matters of occupational safety and health. As the law is framed today, in Trinidad and Tobago, if you are a domestic worker and you suffer an accident on the job, you have few recourse to remedial action. And when you can't work, in most cases, you lose your job. International labor standards enshrine the promotion of social dialogue and, more recently, global partnerships, as the issues which affect the world of work are international in their dimensions. There are two recent examples of the recognition of the need for cross-border and concerted international global effort to tackle issues which could be seen as simply labor issues. In the case of the Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention 1999, number 182, Article 8 stipulates members shall take appropriate steps to assist one another in giving effect to the provisions of this convention through enhanced international cooperation and/or assistance, including support for social and economic development, poverty eradication programs, and universal education. In the case of the Domestic Workers Convention, Article 8, paragraph 3 states that members shall take measures to cooperate with each other to ensure the effective application of the provisions of this convention to migrant domestic workers. So it means that states that are sending intermediary states and receiving states will need to cooperate, and that means a more global partnership has to be developed, it has to be systematic, has to be sustained. In addition, the preamble to these conventions also make reference to other United Nations instrument which makes the links to matters which are not strictly within the sphere of labor. The instruments named include the United Nations Supplementary Convention on the Abolition of Slavery, the slave trade, and institutions and practices similar to slavery, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and finally, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, and in particular, its protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. The final pillar of decent work is the promotion of social dialogue and tripartism. Social dialogue is both a process and an end. It is defined by the ILO as including all types of negotiation, consultation, or simply the exchange of information between or among representatives of governments, employers, and workers on issues of common interest relating to economic and social policy. How social dialogue is institutionalized and practiced may vary from country to country and from region to region. Nevertheless, the most widespread form of social dialogue practiced is collective bargaining, which usually takes place between employers and workers. Of course, government takes part in collective bargaining, both as the authority, which provides the enabling environment for social dialogue, as well as the employer, which has to negotiate with public sector workers. It is accepted that the enabling conditions of social dialogue are strong, independent workers and employers' organizations with the technical capacity and access to the relevant information to participate in social dialogue. Political will and commitment to engage in social dialogue on the part of all the parties. Respect for the fundamental rights of freedom of association and collective bargaining, and the appropriate institutional support. Social dialogue at the tripartite level has been successful where these conditions exist, and in particular where it has been institutionalized and developed into an operational social partnership at the national level. In the Caribbean, a good example of successful tripartite social dialogue is demonstrated by the Social Partnership of Barbados, which since 1992 has generated 6 protocols stipulating the agreements, principles, and common vision of the socio-economic development the partners wish to choose for Barbados. However, Barbados is not the only success story when it comes to social dialogue and social partnership. There are many successful partnerships, for example, in Ireland, Mauritius, and Singapore, to name a few. It should be noted that the social partnership of Barbados is built on a strong tripartite base, government, workers, and employers, but it is also bolstered by contributions from academics and other social actors. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, there was an early attempt at a social compact in, I think it was 2000. However, that document is still sitting on the shelf. There is hope, I say, because recently the government has indicated and announced that it will attempt to develop a social partnership at the national level. And in June of this year, there will be the first working seminar with the tripartite body to begin that process of institutionalizing social dialogue at the national level, and therefore we hope social partnership, which would enable Trinidad to move some of these issues in terms of governance further down the road. Working within the context of the Caribbean community, the ILO works jointly with the CARICOM Secretariat to hold Ministers of Labor meetings every second year, which provides the Ministers of Labor with an opportunity to deal collectively with regional labor issues as well as socio-economic matters. It also provides them with an opportunity to establish positions which the Caribbean delegates can promote at the International Labour Conference in the interest of the region. Regional positions have also been developed for the region at ILO regional meetings, which are always tripartite in nature. Within the last 6 years, the tripartite partners have taken common positions on employment, on how to address the financial crisis and its economic fallout, on social dialogue, which provide them with an operational framework for addressing the decent work deficits within the region. Last year, in collaboration with the Caribbean Development Bank, we took it a step further, where for the first time there was a forum to discuss financial issues and investment with not only the tripartite partners, which would be representatives from the Ministry of Labor and representatives of employers and workers organizations, but also representatives from the finance ministries. Because as you know, the labor partners often have a central focus on human beings, labor, and the social and human consequences, whereas finance primary preoccupation is with financial sustainability and economic viability, and therefore balancing the books. So it was an opportunity for the two sides to try to look at the problem without either focus being the dominant focus, but finding meeting of minds as to how both priorities can be addressed without to the detriment of neither. So globally, what has the ILO to offer? The Decent Work Agenda, the Decent Work Toolkit. At the 2005 World Summit of the United Nations General Assembly, heads of state and government of more than 150 countries made a commitment to implement a wide-ranging international agenda requiring global, regional, and national action. They declared, "We strongly support fair globalization and resolve to make the goals of full and productive employment and decent work for all, including women and young people, a central objective of our relevant national and international policies, as well as our national development strategies, including poverty reduction strategies as part of our efforts to achieve the Millennium Development Goals." This commitment was reaffirmed in July 2006 at the high-level segment of the substantive session of the United Nations Economic and Social Council on the theme, "Creating an Environment at the National and International Levels conducive to generating full and productive employment and decent work for all, and its impact on sustainable development." So, with these commitments, the decent work agenda is now owned by the entire UN system, because the UN is now committed to full employment and decent work for all as the basis of sustainable development. As a result, a toolkit was developed for the use of all agencies and their counterparts. The present format of the toolkit is a diagnostic questionnaire aimed at identifying linkages and potential for synergies. The toolkit is divided into sections to reflect the 4 pillars of the decent work agenda. The 4 pillars are not separate but form part of an integrated approach. There are therefore overlaps. Certain elements, such as social dialogue and the involvement of tripartite partners in devising policies and programs, are mainstreamed into other parts of the toolkit. In the same vein, the checklist of questions in the toolkit stresses not only the quantitative but also the qualitative dimensions of work and applies a gender equality lens throughout. In its present form, the toolkit is a master document in the form of a toolbox, which is to be expanded, deepened, and tailored by each agency or group of agencies according to specific fields of intended application. The Coop toolkit has been designed as a tree of resources to which relevant existing or newly developed tools, including international and national standards, instruments, knowledge, policies, data, best practices, and lessons from experience can progressively be added. This toolkit can thus be seen as an evolving open source document to be continually enhanced, unfolded, and extended by all interested agencies and their respective constituents, partners, and counterparts. In conclusion, poverty is not just a problem of the poor. It is a major obstacle to the development agenda. It is a challenge for all those who defend social justice and those who seek sustainable growth. The goal of a stable and prosperous world economy is only possible if the productivity and consumer power of all its citizens, both women and men, are realized. The ILO Decent Work Agenda provides the tools to advance the development agenda through its promotion of full employment and decent incomes for all workers, social protection for all, which translates into safe workplaces and social security net for when you are unable to work or no longer work. Fundamental principles and rights at work, as well as basic human rights, and social dialogue and tripartism, which offers a tool to strengthen democracy and good governance at all levels of society, starting with the workplace. In addition, at the heart of the Decent Work Agenda is the matter of gender equality and gender equity. So to sum up in the words of our Director General, one summer year. Decent work is work which provides an adequate income and leaves time for other dimensions of life, which offers security for you and your family, respects your rights, gives you a voice, and provides a route to social integration. It's a way of bringing together the economic and social goals in people's lives. End quote. Decent work, therefore, is a basic aspiration of individuals, families, communities, and nations with widely varying histories and cultures. It is a cause that unifies and pulls people together in collaborative endeavor. It is a dream that can be made a reality by step-by-step progress that builds confidence and trust in our capacity to organize political, economic, and social systems to enable people to make full use of their capabilities within a rights-based framework which promotes equity, freedom, and values the dignity of each and every woman and man. It is a pursuit that builds on a new understanding of human security and the need for a social contract based on sustained cooperation and partnership to achieve and sustain it.